All right. Now the second part of the drug lecture. There we go. Good stuff to know as a parent, at the very least, or a decent fellow who wants to help your fellow man. All right, so what do you really have for antivirus drugs? For antivirus drugs, we're not talking about the vaccine. Of course, the vaccine. Matching the protein shell of the virus to pull it out. But antivirus drugs, really, what do you got here? You've got protein shell of amino acids, and you've got the enzyme, and you've got some nucleic acids. This attaches, as I said, to a host in your body, some cell, and the enzyme takes this and somehow splices it inside the body and inside the cell and makes it activate. So, if you can lock up the enzyme, you have something. For example, HIV is a virus that causes a condition, AIDS, acquired immune deficiency syndrome. HIV. People live a long time. Magic Johnson. How do they do it? There's a drug they take. There's a whole cocktail of drugs. AZT was the big one originally. This was an enzyme inhibitor. So somebody's taking an enzyme inhibitor. What's happening? While the enzyme inhibitor is in the body, you haven't gotten rid of the HIV, but you've locked up the enzyme, and it can't do its little job, which makes the nucleic acid work inside of the host cell and makes the thing be able to reproduce. This doesn't take HIV out of your body. And sadly, these class of drugs might work on a broad spectrum of enzymes. So, on a strict schedule, people who had HIV, were taking, and they called it AIDS cocktail. Like they would take a handful of enzyme inhibitor pills of different types sometimes, but it depends on different things. But if they, like let's say it attacks the T cells in the body, right? We know that. If you didn't know that, it does. HIV attacks the T cells in our primary immune system, and other T cells run there and try to help, and then they get infected. So you got to keep the T cells. If you go below this level, you start feeling sick, okay? That's why people can have HIV for so long and not feel sick, because you can work really well with quite a few T cells. A lot of times, if you're really low, then opportunistic infections will attack you, and they get strange cancers like the Kaposi sarcoma, the skin cancers that these people would get that you would naturally get every day of your life and get rid of every day of your life because you have an immune system. Well, strange cancers were showing up on these people. To make a long story short, what happens is, if you do an enzyme inhibitor, but like every 3 hours, this pile of pills, you might be able to make sure that the T cells are not attacked enough because you're stopping the enzyme. So you stop it from getting any lower than this. But boy, what a life. You're like taking something, first of all, it might be inhibiting other enzymes you need in your body to do something, so you never really feel great, and you are taking a lot of pills that are extremely expensive over a year, for years of your body. At some point, you could hurt your liver if you take too many of any one type of pill, because your body's like, what is this and why do I need it? So we are not as afraid of HIV like we used to be, because we say HIV, you can live with it, but boy, what a life. If you're constantly trying to fight the reproduction of this, because we can't pull it out of your body because it mutates too much, which makes it, you wonder about how we're ever going to deal with COVID. Anyway, so antivirus drugs, they stop the replication, but they can only stop it for so long. All right, so let's see. Then there's a class of drugs you need for cancer. Why not? If you live long enough, you die of cancer. So, as we've said before, cancer cells are human cells, unlike a bacteria, unlike some foreign thing attacking you. They're human cells doing something different, making tumors, needing blood to feed on. Just like every fat cell in your body needs blood, these need blood to feed on. Odd things happen with tumors. Sometimes a tumor can send out a signal to all the other tumors in your body, don't grow because I need all the blood. They won't. But they might say, well, you have a tumor and it's a very bad tumor. We got to get it out of you because it's very dangerous. It's a cancerous tumor. So what do? We cut out. Now, you do what you're supposed to do with your doctor and you listen, you make your own decisions, etc. But we cut it out. And sometimes when you cut out the master tumor, a year later they say, oh, it spread through your whole lymphatic system because you've grown tumors all through your body. Strange things happen. But this, you would think the best thing to do would be to reprogram the cancer cells and tell them to do something different, or to not grow as fast. But to just cut out massive parts of your body is kind of something that we hope in 100 years seems really barbaric, okay? But they do it, you know, it doesn't mean, because we don't know why your body wanted to grow the tumor in the first place, okay? So your body might have this thing going on where it's gonna grow tumors for some other reason. And then, radiation therapy. We call it radiation therapy, but like I told you before, it's an extremely poisonous radioactive beam that we put next to tumor cells for a small period of time, and we just hope we kill whatever's in the adjacent region, then we pull it out. So it's therapy because you're killing, but you're killing human cells, right? So it's kind of a hard thing to play with. And then, of course, drugs is what I'm into at this particular point in this particular topic. Then you have chemical therapy. Chemotherapy. And these are usually drugs that kill human cells that grow too fast. Drugs that kill human cells that grow too fast. Why? Well, if you wanted drugs that kill just human cells, it would kill you automatically, right? We don't want to kill all your human cells. But what human cells grow too fast? Often tumor cells. And your hair. You go on chemical therapy, you might lose your hair. Chemotherapy, I mean to say. Often tumor cells that grow too fast, but you don't feel good from it because it's killing human cells. And it's not going to kill only just these human cells. So it's very hard to deal with chemical therapy for cancer. And we kind of hope in the future we can just tell the body to, because a lot of times they wipe out your whole immune system just to pull off killing the cancer. And then they have to try to rebuild your immune system. and it's a pretty rough thing. Okay, they have drugs that make it come back faster, something like those commercials you see with something called Neulasta or something. So there's nothing great to tell you about cancer. It's a rough condition, and I'd like you to know chemotherapy are drugs, while radiation is a radioactive beam that's actually aimed at the tumor. We cut it out, we give you chemotherapy or radiation therapy. It would be nice if we could make the cancer cells just not do the wrong thing and try to be regular human cells again, or at least not really grow anymore. Now, new topic, drugs and the human mind. So, psychotropic drugs, for God's sakes, psychotropic drugs. Type 1, depressants. Type 2, stimulants. And type 3, hallucinogens. Talk about the different ones. Depressants reduce the level of consciousness. Stimulants increase the level of consciousness, and hallucinogens alter the level of consciousness to where you perceive things different than perhaps they are. So let's start with depressants. And the classic depressant, we all know, alcohol. Slows physical and mental activity. And this is one of the strangest things. When you're old, you can't see as well, you can't move as well, and it's rough, and you try to like move better and see better. When you're young, a lot of times alcohol emulates the stages of being a 90-year-old person because you're not seeing as well, but it's funny because you know it's not permanent and you laugh a whole lot, okay? But you get stuck when you're really old. You don't want to like, you're emulating being an elderly person in some respects, but it also depresses the brainstem. So you get a false sense of ability. You can think that you can drive well, and you can't drive well. It gives you a false sense of stability. When we talk about marijuana, it makes you more paranoid, and you'll drive at 30 when it's a 40 or something, because you're worried you can't drive well. When we talk about alcohol, you're like, I can drive fine, I'm just feeling, and you're not driving fine at all, and you don't know it, because it's altering your sense of reality, and it's depressing you. Let's see, 10 million alcoholics in America. Probably a lot more just functioning alcoholics who are able to like just drink before they go to bed, a lot. But they function so they don't register as alcoholics who are having troubles. Let's see. Suicide rate, 58 times higher for alcoholics. You ever have a job where you deal with alcoholics? And I'm not talking about a job where you are a social worker. I was a blackjack dealer in Atlantic City for Caesars Hotel Casino, and people would come in so perfect, and they'd play the game, and 4 hours later, you watch them get completely drunk, and they're like, I love you, I hate you, oh my God, you're horrible, oh, you're my best friend. It drives you nuts, and you really have a hard time with alcoholics when you have to serve them cards every single night for a long time. But the worst part is they come in completely straight, and they drink while they're playing the card games, and you're like, boy, this person's getting really mean. You can get really mean or overly affectionate, and you can do horrible things. Watch yourself with alcohol, of course, and causes birth defects. Now, the planet has used alcohol for so long. It is very hard to get rid of alcohol. We tried it, and we ended up making an underground industry in the 1920s and 30s where we had prohibition, etc. So it's, no matter how bad the drug is, because it's been with humanity for so long, there might be actual illegal drugs that are kind of worse than alcohol. I'm sorry, that are kind of not as bad as alcohol, they often say. But to make a long story short, this is with mankind forever. If you go back as far as you want to go, you're going to see wine discussions. You're going to talk about, there's gods and goddesses of wine. Well, there's gods of wine. I mean, you don't have to know about Dionysus or things like that, but there definitely are gods of wine. So anyway, I'm under depressants, by the way. Good, there's an A there. Next, depressants, anesthetics. Obviously, put you to sleep. Ethers do this. But people take a certain amount of anesthetics, and they don't put themselves to sleep, they consider themselves getting high. So, good example, N2O nitrous oxide. People would take, there used to be a canister, okay? In the 1920s again, this big canister, and you'd put cream, and you would whip the cream, so you would have a gas canister that you would screw on here, and this would charge it so you could spray cream at somebody. And that used to be nitrous oxide. So they would take these nitrous oxide canisters, N2O, and in concerts, they'd fill up a balloon, and they were called whippets, because they came from a case of 6 whipping cream cartridges. That's why you see some kids thinking they can go to, it's an old thing that they believe, they can go to like a whipped cream container in the store and have the gas come off of it. Probably not going to be N2O anymore, it's going to be like CO2. But getting past that, or it could be any gas aside from N2O, that's safe for you. This whippet, when you breathe it in, the N2O replaces O2 in bloodstream. And by replacing the O2 in bloodstream, you're kind of suffocating. So the person falls down because they have way too much, because this is laughing gas, right? At dentist. When you mix this with air, a small amount, you could just make the person laugh because they're in an altered state. But if they breathe in too much, they fall down and then laugh a whole lot if they didn't hurt themselves badly. And you don't want to suffocate yourself like that. So that's like an anesthetic. Another anesthetic, the poorest man's kind of drug, solvent, sniffing. So paper, bag, and glue. Boy, you must get a wicked headache from that. It's I don't know how people, but then again, if they have nothing else to get high with. So solvents, well, they shouldn't do this. Solvent sniffing, where you would take it and it's called huffing. But you're huffing a solvent from a glue. I mean, so that's pretty rough, all right? I don't think you're gonna have that good of an experience. But it definitely would work as some sort of an anesthetic. Pretty rough stuff. There's some other anesthetics. I will speak of these anesthetics to you, because I'm in the world of depressants right now. And you are getting a very strange class with a lot of different topics that the average human being can use, in my opinion, in their lives. As chemists, stuff we don't get to talk about in class. PCP. This was called angel dust. it's a dissociative anesthetic. Now, it's really odd. A drug that makes you feel you're outside your body, watching your body, to where you can be a small person and extremely dangerous because you're willing to break your arm against the person you're fighting. So that's why people are always afraid of people on PCP. A lot of people had reason to be afraid for other reasons, but they were terrified of people on PCP if they had to like try to control them because they think angel dust, they think they're outside their body watching you. Sadly, what was this? Like everything else that had a reason, this is a hog tranquilizer. When you have, see, it's a horrible thing to talk about, but when you have to slaughter and murder hogs, the idea that you would give them a dissociative anesthetic, okay, because hogs have a lot of things that are close to humans that people used to call human cannibals. They'd say a long pig or something, because if you look at a hog's body without the hair, it's kind of terrifyingly close to like a human's kind of a situation. The idea that you would tranquilize the animal with something like this, and then you're eating the animal with a hog tranquilizer in it, I'm like, great, because you're really not sure what you're getting there. So that's why people think about organic things where you're still murdering the creature, but it just seems very frightening, and the idea of giving the hog an out-of-body experience seems very wrong. But maybe it's totally okay. It must be something that they do in the meat industry. I'm not judging anyone's industry. I'm just giving you facts about stuff. Maybe not good facts. Next one. This is interesting. You have Adolf von Baer made B-A-E-Y-E-R aspirin. So, Baer aspirin, well, that's not a depressant, but he also made barbiturates. And it's very addictive. Like there was you could be given some weird things. Remember we talked about codeine as being a narcotic, and we'll mention it. Well, a drug called Theranol is a narcotic with barbiturates, I think. I mean, you can mix all kinds of stuff with people. But anyway, it's very addictive. Where does a word like this come from? It comes from Barbara and urine, if you're curious. His mistress was named Barbara, and they used to like to do this drug together, and it was derived from urine. But still, barbiturates, that's interesting. Puts you to sleep, but here's where it gets dangerous. And 200 times greater effect with alcohol. Boy, you could really put yourself to sleep forever and put yourself down in a coma with some of these drugs. But you got to be careful if you're drinking and taking these kind of drugs. Well, you shouldn't be taking these kind of drugs and drinking. But that's an interesting story. Then, of course, my voice will go after 5 hours of lecture. Then there are the narcotics. And these come from poppy capsule. Always found it interesting. You have all of these poppy fields of flowers. I was thinking of Wizard of Oz. Oh, the poppies put everybody to sleep, that kind of thing. If you ever watched the Wizard of Oz. But boy, we fought all these wars in Afghanistan. We never really just burned all the poppy fields. Somebody was always making some money off of these drugs. And to this day, I would imagine, I don't know who's making money off what, but it's hard for people not to convert them into something that is so abused. Now, let's speak of this. 10% of juice in poppy seed is opium. No, better yet, is morphine, sorry. And morphine is about the same chemical structure as an endorphin. Now it gets interesting. Not that it wasn't interesting before, because you have to remember what the endorphins were. The endorphins were natural to your body for deep pain. You're having deep pain, your body can release endorphins. So your brain releases endorphins, but then has endorphin receptors to pull them up or pick them back up. Person is absolutely crazy in the middle of a fight, and they say, I didn't feel any pain, I was shot, but oh my God, in the hospital, I was horrifying pain. Or hopefully your body releases the endorphin. As I said before, you're saving some children from a burning building, and you broke through all this glass, and you're a hero for doing that, and you say, I didn't feel any pain because my body released endorphins. But your body cannot just have the ultimate painkiller inside of there for long, because your body needs pain. So your body has endorphin receptors that pull them back out. And it controls very carefully. You can't just tell your body, you know something, I'd like this really massive high right now. Give me a lot of endorphins. Your body's not going to do that. You can get some from exercise. People talk about that. So morphine is 10% of the juice. Morphine, your body thinks, is an endorphin. So you take, for example, originally opium. It was smoked under glass. When drugs are illegal, people get them mixed up, and people smoke marijuana, which has something. But often people think, well, I smoke marijuana, and then somebody tries smoking opium and they smoke it under glass. It's a totally different thing. You're smoking morphine. I mean, it's not really getting you high as much as it's completely giving you no pain and putting you to sleep. Now, this is why China was always called the sleeping giant. The European powers cut up China, France, England, etc. And they really weren't against the idea, maybe they had stuff they would write on paper, but they weren't against the idea of these people doing a lot of drugs, opium, to keep them quiet. And the Chinese people really resented drugs, because this is the 1800s, because they said to themselves, you know, if we ever get rid of these drugs, well, actually the British would say this, but if they ever got rid of those drugs, the Chinese will run the world. Well, you wonder why in some parts of communist China, if someone's a drug dealer, they'll do execution publicly. They so have a history of, look at how much drugs held them back when we all were high on opium and opium dens. We never want to be a lazy country again. So it's a country that absolutely hates drugs. Some of those Asian countries, you're like, that's a pretty rough sentence you got for selling drugs or something. But they have a history because it's extremely addictive. Barbiturates are gone. Any of these narcotics based on the opium are extremely addictive. So your body makes, if you can't blame it, more endorphin receptors. You have just given yourself, okay, and now we're past smoking it. Now we inject morphine. Old 18th something, so 19th century, if you're looking at the Sherlock Holmes stuff, people got addicted to injecting morphine. Now why? This is a really odd story. Sure, we talked about the idea that people didn't clean during the Civil War and there was all these flesh wounds and they got infected because the doctors didn't wash their hands. And we talked about the idea of phenol being an antiseptic and how important it was. But there was something worse, okay? If you have a camp of people who are living underground as refugees and they're drinking bad water, they can get horrible diarrhea and dehydrate, and that's it for them. Dysentery, diarrhea, horrible. You drink bad water, you can get that. And you can't blame the people, they're in these camps, okay? There's like really no good water. So what would happen is, in the Civil War, you did not like the bad water. And why? Because you had horrible diarrhea. Well, one thing about these drugs, if you think about how Elvis Presley died, they say, you know, he was always taking laxatives and they weren't working. Morphine causes constipation. So they didn't know any better. They couldn't clean the water for the soldiers, so everybody was taking morphine so they wouldn't lose all of their water and diarrhea. So they took morphine, this ultimate endorphin drug, just to stop constipation. And it became the soldier's disease. After the war, soldiers look spelled badly, but after the war, these soldiers were addicted to morphine that they got on, not because of pain, because these are the ones who weren't shot most of the time. You could use morphine for pain. They just got it because they didn't want to die of constipation, not constipation, of diarrhea. So you would lose all your electrolytes. You have to drink a lot of Gatorade, and they didn't have a lot of Gatorade at the time. So now people are injecting morphine. And the doctors are having trouble with morphine. And it's just a chemical. It's made to look, or it looks just like an endorphin, okay? So your body makes more and more endorphin receptors. Now here's the addiction. You take a lot of morphine and your body says, wow, that's a lot of endorphins. This guy must be saving a ton of children from burning buildings. Let me get a lot of receptors to get this stuff out. He doesn't want it. But the guy's like, I want more. So you start taking some more of this. So at some point, if you try to stop taking the morphine, the endorphin receptors, you have way too many endorphin receptors. So you don't want to screw up your body chemistry. So you feel real bad pain. This is the pain of withdrawals, because your body is not allowing any natural endorphins to even be present, because your body's like, let's pick it up. They're not going to be able to get rid of your brain isn't able to get rid of the endorphin receptors. Your brain doesn't know you screwed yourself up with morphine. Your brain doesn't know that you've hyped yourself up with a ton of endorphins. So what's your brain to think? Your brain is like, this guy might always have this much morphine. But the minute he stops taking morphine, you have the real bad problem. So we scientists wanted to make it less addictive. That would be a good thing if we made it less addictive. How does a scientist do anything? Well, they change the chemical slightly. So over here, I'll keep writing. The theory of this whole thing is don't screw up your body chemistry, because once you screw up you're all going to have a shot at this sometime in life. You hurt yourself badly, your back is broken or something, and they give you a lot of narcotics because you're in wicked pain. You screw up your body chemistry at some point, you can't undo the screw up later in life. because your brain, so you just want to like hope that you don't mess up your body chemistry, and we're trying not to mess up the endorphin receptor levels. So we don't want to have too many narcotics in our body, but they're a lot of fun, people think. So anyway, getting past that, if you change one OH group in morphine, you make codeine. And this is still addictive, but less. So that was a success. This is the one that I said is a cough suppressant. Spelled badly. It's a cough suppressant. So the people were like, well, you know, it's good, but it's still addictive. The scientists wanted to make sure they changed morphine, and they had no idea why they were doing this. They just started changing more chemicals on the chemical. Like if you have a chemical with a bunch of OHs, take the OH off, make an ester, do something to it and see what happens. If you don't kill the guy, you make something different. So, codeine was still addictive. So we tried again. Now, when a drug is new, it isn't illegal. Nobody knows it's illegal because they just never met the drug before. So these drugs were put out on the market for the average family to take, if you're wondering, okay? Try it again. Change 2 OH groups of morphine. Because if you change one OH group and you made codeine, you must be on the right, to make it less addictive. Change 2 OH groups of morphine. Why not? You make heroin. And they said, this has to be less addictive. Okay, well, that was a mistake. It wasn't a mistake. They meant well. So you could look up the original, you could say, there's these weird handbills for, hey, take this drug, buy it at your pharmacist, buy it at your chemist. It has aspirin and that new drug, heroin. Boy, do you feel good on heroin. Okay, so I'm not saying you feel good on heroin, but this is way more addictive. We're stuck with heroin. We thought it was going away. We were so sure it was going away, but they never stopped growing the poppy fields. So, boy, the world got back into heroin. And, you know, they say, is there a gateway drug into heroin? Is marijuana a gateway drug into heroin? Do people do this, etc.? Make a long story short, you screwed up your endorphin levels so badly with heroin, okay? So, sometimes what you can do is you can take like methadone to fix the endorphin receptors to give them something to hang on to and you can function, but it's not a great life and you're stuck on methadone the rest of your life because you've messed up your body chemistry. You've messed up your natural endorphin level. Try not to mess up your body chemistry is the theory here. Endorphins are an important biological molecule. You need them to save children from a burning building. Okay, so another class of drugs. It's going through drugs. Anti-anxiety drugs. Your anti-anxiety drugs. In your brain, serotonin naturally calms you. Endorphins naturally take away deep pain. It's good to have endorphins. Don't screw up the level. Serotonin naturally calms you. It's good to have serotonin, but don't screw up the level of serotonin. Now, there are some people with really bad biochemistry, even born with bad biochemistry. You could look it up. There are like some 5-year-old children and just talk about murdering their family, and you're like, and there's a perfectly good family there, and they're like, boy, this is, so that kid really needs it. But you can't put everybody on anti-anxiety drugs because you're screwing with the brain chemistry. Everything gets through the blood-brain barrier. So yes, they might put everybody on anti-anxiety drugs, but I'm not so sure that everybody, because if the person is anxious with something that they need therapy for, or they're very stressed out and they just can't handle their brain, you can manage it chemically, but there are always going to be side effects to managing brain chemicals. So, low levels of serotonin are noted in depression. There are a whole pile of drugs. Valium, addictive drugs, Prozac. Let's talk about Prozac. There's so many that you can take. Let's talk about Prozac. That was a big one at first. So Prozac is a serotonin reuptake inhibitor. Prozac is a serotonin reuptake inhibitor. What the world does that mean? Serotonin calms you, your body makes it. Your body wants to get rid of it. It wants to uptake it. Too much endorphins, your body wants to uptake endorphins. They want to have endorphin receptors. Too much serotonin, your body might want you to be anxious so you could run away from a murderer or something like that. But if you take Prozac, maybe the serotonin isn't reuptaked and you stay calm. I had a friend, I mean, it seems like from 20 to 30, at first until you're 20, a lot of times everything's new and it's fun. And then from 20 to 30, you're like, wow, this is like all of life and I'm only going to start looking worse the rest of my life. After 30, 35, you have a reason to live a lot of times. So it's very dangerous between 20 and 30 for people's minds because they're like just realizing how long life is, the end of life, and all the things we do and all the work you'll have to do, and you get depressed sometimes, etc. So to make a long story short, you just got to be able to handle your nerves. I remember I was quite nervous after graduate school, and I was eating in a priest room with an 80-year-old priest, and I was probably in my early 30s, and I wasn't able to eat because when I get stressed, I don't eat. When other people get stressed, they eat too much. Some people don't eat. It's just a natural response, okay? So he was like, what's wrong with you? And he's like 85 years old, and I was like, you know, I'm worried about stuff, because I ended up losing that job, and I came to Bell. I didn't lose it, but I got into a fight with a lot of people in terms of things. I was pushing for a chemistry degree. They didn't have one there. So to make a long story short, I said, you know, I'm just nervous. And he said, well, you got to get to control your mind. He said that you have to realize that everyone you see around you is worried that you're going to notice that they're half insane. So everybody is just always all mostly insane. You think they all got it going on. None of them got it going on. They're just worried and stressed about stuff. You have to control your mind. Later in life, I got good at controlling my mind. Now I feel really confident at 56. It's a shame because from 20 to 30, you'll never look that good again. That's when you should be your happiest, okay? But half the time, you're trying to figure out life and you're most depressed during those years. It's very sad. So I had a friend, he had become a casino dealer and he got a wife and a child and a white picket fence and he got a mortgage and it was kind of tight, but he was able to do it. And he got so stressed, and he thought he was having a heart attack, and the doctor said, this is the 1980s, hey, you know something, take this Prozac. And he would talk to me, and he always talked as fast as I did, we were close friends, and he said, it's the most wonderful thing. It's like whenever I get depressed or stressed out, there's like a dimmer switch that goes off in my mind, because the serotonin is not allowed to be reuptake, and he can't get that stressed. Well, the first thing I started to notice is he would say, why are you talking so fast? I'm like, we've always talked this fast. We're from New Jersey. Okay, that's what we do. Oh, slow down. So he became like a different personality. At some point, this works for a lot of people if you manage it, okay? It's great and important for people, especially the ones who have really got bad biochemistry, okay? You don't want people with bad biochemistry not being treated. But they often change prescriptions And drugs. This is no longer working, take this. This is no longer working, take this. There's all these different drugs, take this. Man, he ended up just overreacting to something that somebody said, and they put him away for a while. He kept saying over and over, it was sad, oh God, they took my dog. I'm like, you lost your wife and your baby at the same time, because now they're not gonna wanna be with you. But it was so great at first, but please be careful. Don't screw up your serotonin levels. Don't screw up your endorphin levels. I know it's hard, I know these are easy fixes, but you probably should say to yourself, the rest of your life, you've screwed up one of your major biochemicals. Let me continue. By the way, 1 in 10 Americans have mental illness. Half the people in hospitals are probably there for mental illness. Let's speak of another drug, and I won't do too much, I promise. I want to stress you out with drugs, because then you might, hey, I want you to try to have a decent life, be a good person, sing in a choir, have fun. All right, stimulants. First one, they produce excitability, restlessness, tremors, high blood pressure, you have to be very careful with these things. Hallucinogen, okay, they're going to say this too. They're going to say hallucinations. Hallucinations. Well, you know what I said. Hallucinations. Let's speak about why they produce hallucinations. This is sleep. You need REM, rapid eye movement sleep, to solve problems. Everybody needs rapid eye movement sleep to solve problems. Albert Einstein did not want to solve his problems too easily when he was doing math, so he would only sleep 20-minute cat naps. His body got enough rest, but he wouldn't go to REM sleep so he wouldn't get the wrong quick answer. But when you're stressed about somebody doing something in your life that's upsetting you, if you hit a really good patch of REM sleep a couple nights in a row, things seem better. If a person doesn't get to REM sleep, like, here's an example. If you only sleep with alcohol and don't dream. So here's what's happening. You've got a lot of stuff going on in your mind. You put yourself out with a lot of alcohol till you pass out and you sleep 3 hours. But then you try to hit REM sleep and dream, and you wake up screaming because you don't like it, and you're like, oh God, geez, that's a bad dream. You didn't get through it, all right? You need to figure out how to get through whatever's stressing you out. But you could find ways of constantly. So an alcoholic is going to seem kind of strange because they're not actually processing their problems. In the same respect, if you're taking too much stimulants, sure, you get excitability, restlessness, tremors, high blood pressure, but you may not be getting to decent REM sleep, and at some point you get hallucinations because you're just not okay. All right, so how can we deal with this? Let's talk about it. Well, some classic stimulants. Obvious. Caffeine. A no-dose, 200 milligrams. If you buy a bottle of caffeine pills, maybe you spend $5 for 100, 200 milligram no-dose. If you're carefully monitoring it, you could take these drugs and get important things done in your life. You don't want to just take it for no reason or something like that. If you buy energy drinks, they say, look at all the different additives and natural herbs we have, but they often have 200 milligrams of caffeine. You're spending $4 on a drug that you could buy for a couple cents. So all I'm saying is, yes, they're fun to drink, the energy drinks, but I'm not saying you should even take it. If you took half of the pill, okay? Because coffee is 65 milligrams, if you're wondering. So I just think people are spending so much money on these energy drinks, and they say, look at all these wonderful things, and the only thing that matters is the caffeine inside of it. The rest of it's just all fluff with candy and sugar. Anyway, caffeine is obvious. Used to diet. We talked about that, but let's do it. Produces fight or flight response. I often say, let's say you're starving, you haven't eaten in a really long time, and your best sandwich you've always wanted is in front of you, and you're about to eat it, and somebody starts to murder someone in your family, and you're like, you know something, I'm just not hungry anymore. I'd rather stop this person. Well, that's the fight and flight response, and that's a good thing. You shouldn't just be someone who can still eat the sandwich, because then you have a lot of problems that a lot of the other drugs are probably needed for, okay? But with caffeine, you can trick your body into thinking it constantly has to do something damn really important and not eat. But that's kind of dangerous. Now, often, you have to be careful, diet drugs might even have amphetamines. And these are speed, crank, if it's made in someone's garage badly. Amphetamines, those are speed. They're taking it to the next level past the caffeine. Now the caffeine, you take too much of that, you feel like you don't realize you took one 200 milligram pill and you took two, you could probably blow your heart out. So you gotta be careful with this stuff. You have to be careful with everything. But I bet you a lot of times they say this is gonna make you lose weight. They got you so hyped up. You're not eating nothing, you're also a terrifying person to be around. All right, now, then there are strange ones. Let's talk about this. The natural brain chemical of, not endorphins for pain, not serotonin to calm you down, dopamine. And I call this the I1 drug chemical. It's strange. If you screw with your dopamine level, and if you do it chemically, you can really screw it up for a long time. If you screw with your dopamine level, if you're completely depressed and somebody comes to your house and it's a real person and they have a film crew and they have that $2 million Publishers Clearinghouse check and they say, here's your check. No matter how depressed you were, you might suddenly feel elated. That's a flow of dopamine. Now, of course, there'd be a drug to manipulate that. Methamphetamines. A meth addict, you see these people, they look very poor. They've ground their teeth to a dust, for God's sakes. They have so much speed inside of them. But they also have such a high level of dopamine. Please don't take meth because of the way I'm talking about this. But in their minds, they constantly feel with the dopamine, they just won the Publishers Clearinghouse check. I know it sounds crazy. As bad as that person looks on the side of the street for meth, and they're smiling, they feel like they've won. And they have all the emulation of actually winning the Publishers Clearinghouse check or winning anything. So you have to be careful. Why? If you quit meth, which you should, you can never, if you took too much, feel like you won again. Now I'll explain that. You'll know you won something. You could have been a meth addict and you were playing with your dopamine levels and you really screwed them up. You quit meth, but you can never get your natural dopamine levels. God forbid you were a narcotics person, so you screwed up your endorphins, and you screwed up your serotonin levels, and now you screw up your dopamine levels. Try not to do that. But if you screwed up your dopamine levels, somebody could say, your wife and you just had a baby, here's your special new baby, and you're like, that's great, you know, because you can't feel great about anything ever again. Why? Because you screwed up your brain chemistry. I know it's addictive, and boy, if you ever get your hands on some of this stuff, I'm pretty sure people would want you to take it, and you don't want to ever take it when they try to tell you to take it. Because once you do that, you become addicted to something. Just try to become addicted for living a good life and being happy and singing a choir or something. So, do something that makes you happy. Challenge yourself. Do something that is kind of fun. Now, there's another problem with dopamine. I gotta bring it up, but it's not a drug problem. Give a young child dopamine fixes constantly. Later, there is a major problem. Now you're probably saying, I'm not giving a young child dopamine fixes constantly. The kid's playing video games. It's set up in such a beautiful way. I don't play these in, but it's set up in such a beautiful way. This 5-year-old, the 6-year-old is like, I want dopamine flow. I want dopamine flow. You could not even have to take meth, and you could destroy a kid's brain with this social media, because they're like, I won, and then you're like, study for this math test. I don't like that. You know, I'm trying to get my students right now addicted to studying chemistry, with a bunch of small exams every single week for the general chemistry students that I took over this class. And what I'm doing is I'm giving exams they can win at. I'm messing with their dopamine levels. They will study the small amount of material, they win, and then whenever they study, the dopamine will flow as if they're playing video games. They don't realize it, but I can do that, okay? Because I have to fix them, I have to make doctors for the next generation of people. For you guys, to make a long story short, be careful with your kids. I'm not saying raise them on a farm with no social media, but it used to be that it was only the boys messed up. But now the social media, they have things where you can just watch puppies all day long or something and be just as happy with your dopamine. Please try to protect your kids. And if you're in a mess because of this, and you are worried about life a whole lot, and you only feel good with your social media, you might already be on a slippery slope with the dopamine. I'm not saying take meth or anything, but do something to just be happy in another way. Put a Frisbee in the back of your car, and the two of you people throw the Frisbee back and forth. Stop at a park, throw the Frisbee. That's all I'm saying. Do anything. All right, so that's your dopamine talk. Now, I'm going to finish all these drugs up in this talk. There aren't that much. All right, so legal, prescribed speed. This is always confusing to me, but it works. Of course, diet drugs. We talked about that. But then something like Ritalin, Adderall. That's so strange. The idea that it's a speed, but it makes you think more orderly. Once again, some people need it. To focus. I could see that, especially if they've had a bunch of social media pulling them and the dopamine levels are all screwed up. So some people might need to focus. Make a long story short, when I was young, I was clearly as ADHD as anybody. I had to learn all these tricks to pass stuff. I completely messed up all my classes, had to retake them all again, okay? So to make a long story short, when I was young, I had a lot of that problem. I became a scientist because it matches my personality. You know, it's great when you fix your kids with this stuff. I understand it. Adderall, all that kind of stuff. But I became a scientist because it matches my personality. I often wonder if somebody was frustrated, let's say my parents weren't completely poor, or my dad wasn't illiterate or whatever, if I was completely in a supportive family and they saw that I was doing very poorly in school, if they had given me Ritalin, I might have loved to study accounting and loved numbers instead of having such trouble with them. I might have been like, I can focus now. I might have went through graduate school and become an accountant, but the minute I stopped Ritalin, I would have went back to the personality. And I would have been like, oh my God, why am I an accountant? So please be careful. Some people are meant to be scientists. Some people might be meant to be accountants. But if you take a drug, you have to be careful. Like I've had students who they'd come to my office before a big exam, pre-med, going into medical school, and they'd say, Dr. Sinski, do you have a knife? And I'd say, well, why? He goes, well, I have to cut this Ritalin pill, this Adderall pill. And I'd say, why do you have to cut it? They would start to sound almost artistic, to where they'd say, well, you see, if I take this much of it, I'll study, but if I take that much of it, then I'll stay up all night, I won't be able to sleep, so therefore I want to take exactly this much to get through this exam. And I'm like, you're about to go to medical school. At some point, you don't have to do this with drugs. I felt so bad for the kids, but what can you do? Drugs are dangerous in some respects. So what is the theme of this? Watch your endorphin levels, watch your serotonin levels, and it's hard because of all the phones you have, but you really got to watch your dopamine levels. You screw yourself up even without drugs. Okay, it wouldn't be a talk on these things if we didn't mention cocaine. For cocaine, I'm going to finish this up in this one lecture. I had done probably 4 hours, and I'm doing it only in 2.5, I think. But pure cocaine is not soluble in water. Must be smoked. You can absorb things through your lungs if you smoke it, but you can't snort if it isn't soluble in water. Now, the part of cocaine, I'm going to draw a molecule here for you. La, 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 something like this. O, C double bond O, benzene ring. So let's just put this much of it up. I might have this one corner wrong, but C double bond O, OCH3, not the important part. So between here and here, there's a nitrogen. It has a lone pair of electrons. This, I might have messed this corner up, but this is a nitrogen base. This would be the type you'd have to smoke. If you react with acid, you make salts. So where am I going with that? If somebody had NaOH, a base, plus HCl and acid, you make NaCl, the salt. Take off the H, put it here to make water, put the NaCl. So the base becomes a salt, and this is soluble in water. What the people did in South America is they would take this off, put an H plus Cl minus, and this is the soluble salt you snort. Now, what do you got with cocaine? Well, let's say you have 0.25 grams, you snort over a night. It's a bit of an anesthetic and a stimulant. And this is the classic stuff that you ever see in movies, Scarface, etc., the white powder. They would make it for the Americans in South America in a snortable form. But then, people in America started to free the base. This is not an easy thing to do chemically correctly. So you have the story of Richard Pryor. You would have to take flammable chemicals. People were taking the 25 grams of the 0.25 grams, sorry, the quarter gram of cocaine that they would snort all night long, and they would free the base, and then they would smoke it. Now, these are many lines. You smoke it in one puff, and they get extremely high. It becomes very addictive. And if they don't die from that level of high in their lungs, they're going to want a lot more of it. So what they were doing is they were taking this, doing hardcore chemistry, and Richard Pryor caught on fire famously from doing the chemistry, because if you light, you have a match next to some ether or something that you're using to free the base, you have some trouble. So then they would smoke this. Today, we care about sentencing laws because AUSC, we have, now when amphetamine is crank, we have crack cocaine. This is a very poor version where you make a dirty version you can smoke. It's not done cleanly like the original where they would free the base and do serious chemistry no matter how high they were, okay? They were taking the 0.25 grams that was given to America and they were freeing the base, and there was all these songs with the word bass in them and all that kind of stuff in the 80s and early 90s. Well, to make a long story short, crack cocaine, you are smoking it. And the sentencing laws you worry about, because the worry is that middle-class white Americans were snorting cocaine, and a lot of times in the city, people of color would be using the crack, so they made much longer sentences for the same amount of the same drug, only the smokable kind, and they try to justify it. And that's part of your social classes, not part of mine, but I'm trying to tell you what it means. So finally, what's left? Well, of course, here's one for you. Much different. Nicotine. My dad, after World War II, he was shot, and his cousin was killed, and it was terrifying for him. And the doctors, of course, said, you should smoke more cigarettes, calm you down. So, nicotine, 1940s, it's a stimulant, but cigarettes calm you down. How in the world is that working? Well, it is a stimulant. So when you chew it in gum form, it is nothing like the smoking, okay? You are taking care of your addictive nicotine habit, but you're taking a pure stimulant. It's very dangerous, okay? You gotta be careful how much of that gum you chew. But it's a stimulant, but why does a cigarette also calm you down? The cigarette gives you carbon monoxide and slightly suffocates you. And boy, if you breathe into a paper bag, you'll calm down. If you slightly suffocate from carbon monoxide, you'll calm down. So that's why when people were doing hardcore math in like the original Apollo 13 movies and things like that, well, in the original Apollo 13 work, they were trying to like do math where a rocket would go over the horizon and land somewhere and come back, and it was before major computers, it was very hard. You saw people chain smoking. They were getting the Ritalin effect of the order in their minds, but they were calming themselves down with the carbon monoxide. It's hard to beat cigarettes. That's why people have a hard time recreating it, okay? Like when they give you vaping, where you're getting nicotine, that's really kind of dangerous because you can put anything inside of there, right? And you're actually taking an oil into your lungs. It's quite dangerous. But to make a long story short, you're not getting the carbon monoxide. I'm not saying that someone should smoke because they end up dying of cancer, but that's a hard one to recreate. And they try it with gum, and they try it with all kinds of things. You're just getting people addicted to different types of drugs. Finally, I will finish this discussion. One more sheet of paper, no more, I promise you. Hallucinogens. People wrote to me quite a bit, not you, whoever you are, you're probably saying, why would they write them and tell them this? People wrote to me and said, oh my God, I really liked the health discussion, the exercise discussion. This one doesn't hurt you either, okay? It's not a bad talk. Hallucinogens. First of all, the top one, LSD. If you watch a TV show called Adam 12 from the 1960s, two cops, Reed and Malloy, they would find people on LSD, but it wasn't illegal yet because it was a brand new drug, and they didn't know how to handle it a lot of times. I never thought that Adam 12 anybody watched it today. But if you looked at the riots where they said a curse word 12 and wrote it everywhere, I couldn't believe it. I looked it up. It's from the 1968 TV show Adam 12. So I'm like, how does today's kids know Adam 12 to say that X12? You know, I would forget about it. They didn't like cops, but they could have just wrote something else, but they wrote something 12 from a TV show from the 60s. That's bizarre. LSD. 10 micrograms is enough to trip. All right, this is the roughest thing, because if you think about it, what's aspirin? Aspirin, which is not something you trip on, is 325,000 micrograms, and 10 micrograms of LSD is enough to trip. It's illegal, which makes it even more interesting because it's very hard to get somebody making an illegal drug at exactly that level. They take a liquid, and they know the concentration of the solution, and they take a row of stamps, and they take a pin, and they touch it to each one, and then somebody licks the stamp. And supposedly that's 10 micrograms. Boy, you're asking a lot for a non-pharmacist to do, but that's how they're doing this. What's interesting about that, when they first thought it, it's a neurotransmitter. That works fast. It can replace your average neurotransmitter in your brain. They thought they would make mentally retarded people think faster. Boy, they made them think faster, but they didn't make them less mentally, okay, you can't say mentally retarded, people with Down syndrome, but they experimented, those scientists, on a lot of people with LSD, and they thought, this is gonna be great. The problem is, many problems, years later, you can have a flashback, or someone tripped too much and you've messed up their brain chemistry. So now we got one more way to mess up your brain chemistry. I went to Stockton State College in Pomona, New Jersey. It was a very strange college. It was in the woods, and it was the second party college to a place in California, but they had cabins in the woods. It was in the early 1980s, and the school would supply kegs for the cabins for the students. It was bizarre. They had no competition. They had a swimming pool that was exactly 1 inch short of Olympic record. So no future student could ever set a record at that school. They did not like stress. They came out of the 1960s drug movement, and they made a college. It was real strange. But anyway, you learn a lot of stuff there. Years later, you can have a flashback. There were students still there in the 1980s who had been there 12, 13 years, and you could barely talk to them because they had replaced too many neurotransmitters with LSD. And you never know how many times a person trips before they completely turn into a different person. So it's really not a good thing. The saddest part is we're talking about a hallucinogen, right? When people would take LSD, they would stay in a farmhouse away from everybody else for probably an entire day, because it's like a 14-hour trip. For the first hour, they have these hallucinations, which are interesting because everything like this would look like something totally different as the person's tripping for that. But the last 13 hours or something, they just have all this amazing speed effect. And they write all these stuff in books, and they think they're brilliant, and the next day you read it, and there's absolutely nothing cohesive in there. So it never made anyone any smarter. Now, the natural ones, mescaline, mushrooms, students in the hallway, right? Marijuana. You don't think of marijuana as hallucinogenic, but you got to be careful with this one, because smoking it, I probably spelled it wrong, put an I there maybe. Anyway, you don't think of it as, but smoking it versus eating it. If somebody eats too much of this stuff, they're gonna see trails, which is partially hallucinogenic. If you take LSD, you'll have an hour where you have to have a good brain to know that you are tripping, because you would go nuts if someone slipped this to you, you wouldn't know what was happening. And it would be a very strange thing, and you have to have presence of mind, like that old priest told me, always be in control of your mind. So mushrooms, marijuana, mescaline, the American Indian, stuff like that. To make a long story short, that takes care of that story, and I gotta leave this room because I've been here for 3 hours and the lecture is over, and that takes care of the lecture for drugs. Woo.